Ready then. You want to introduce anything, or you want to make sure to admit everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, you're good. We're good to start. All right. Sina tells me we're good to start. I'm used to an introduction and a whole thing, but we're not doing the introductions. And first of all, I'll do a bit of an introduction. I first want to speak to the people that are present in physical form. Tselem Elohim in front of me. Bruchim Habayim. First of all, welcome to Lauderdale Road Synagogue. You're in the library of the Sephardi Center here. This is where the Ma'amad or the board normally meets, and where it is that we give shiur. We give many shiurim here. So it's wonderful to be able to sit with you in person, in physical presence. There's nothing matches physical presence. And so it's wonderful to be with you here, and welcome. And to all of you that are there on Zoom, Bruchim Habayim, welcome to the first shiur class. That is the inauguration or the maiden discussion in what Sina calls membership mode. And essentially what that means is that this is the first of our series of courses of learning, of study in a membership format, meaning that the people that are here have committed themselves both mentally, physically, and financially, to be engaged in this study. And so there is something that you're giving in to this that is a stake of your own commitment. So what we're going to be doing tonight, and I really do, if I could, I would welcome each and every single one of you individually, because each and every single one of you that is here is a tremendous beracha. It's a tremendous beracha. So I'm very honored to be able to share the Torah with you tonight, and to be able to have the great zechut of opening this amazing endeavor that we're all embarking on together. I do want to thank again Sina and Avi for all of their work that has brought this to fruition and to its place, and for that matter, all of the others that have lent their hand to being able to make this something that is successful and something that people can genuinely engage with and connect to. I mean, recently they opened the Discord app and all of the discussion that's happening there. And this is really, I mean, you look at this and you recognize when the Hachamim said a person is supposed to say, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, that the world was created for me. I mean, there's no greater expression of that than being able to use all of the wonderful technologies and formats and interfaces that we have in order to be able to be Magdil Torah and to be able to achieve our mission statement. And tonight, the shiur is about our mission statement. Why it is that, we kind of set this point as our goal, because that's what a mission statement is. It's our mission, right? What are we aiming to do with regards to this? Now, the truth of the matter is that we really didn't have much choice in terms of our mission statement, because Harambam already explained what the mission statement is, and we're just taking that, we're picking that up, and we're trying to be able to achieve that in the best way that we can. So we can sit and pontificate on how it is that we came to this, but the reality is I came to this mission statement because it's what we're supposed to be engaging in as our mission. So we're going to look at that tonight. We're going to look at that in layers. The bulk of the shiur tonight will be a look at a very central presentation of the Moreh Nebuchim. So it will be textual. We're going to be reading a significant amount of the Moreh Nebuchim. So what I will do when I get to the Moreh, although all of you have the link for the sources, and you can pull it up on your phones, on your computers, and so on and so forth, when I get to the Moreh, I will share the screen with the text of the Moreh. So it'll be up here for you on the screen if you want to read it with me, and for you up there, it'll be on your screen there if you want to read it that way. So without further ado, we're going to get started. Good. So at the top of the source sheet, I have the mission statement. And the mission statement is that we are a virtual and physical Bet Midrash with international students, which is all true so far, because we are virtual and physical with international students. So far, we're not lying. But the bolded part of the mission statement is this: striving to know God by embracing the world through the lens of Torah. So it's important to recognize that the central aspect of the mission statement is not the end, right? Not embracing the world through the lens of Torah. That's a wonderful and exciting endeavor, but that is not the goal. The goal is to know God. That's our goal. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is an aspect of what it is that means. And we will look at why it is that we strive to know God through the world, right? Through embracing the world from a lens of Torah. Why is that? The mode or the manner in which we come to know God. And that's it. That's all we're going to do tonight. So I hope not to disappoint if you were thinking we would do anything more, but I will be thrilled if we come out of tonight having a real good understanding of this. Everything else that we do, everything else that you will learn, everything else that will be presented, that you will unpack, will be some form of this. It will have something to do with your endeavor of knowing Hakadosh Baruch Hu, of knowing God through embracing His world. The lens of the Torah will also be something that we develop, because we don't assume that you just happen to have a lens of Torah in your pocket that you pick up and you look through in order to be able to know. We're going to have to develop that as well. We're going to have to understand what is the lens of the Torah. We'll build that lens through which we can look. We'll understand the nature of Berit, of covenant in all of this, because why are we coming to know God in the first place if there isn't this sense of covenant, right? The sense of relationship. So this is the fundamental foundation and building block. We are essentially going to only use Harambam tonight, outside of the Torah itself, in terms of this, because he is our ultimate guide. And we make no qualms about that. Right? I mean, Harambam is definitely our ultimate guide. His vision, his teaching, his framework, his expression and understanding, his whole milieu of Torah and mitzvot and so on, is our primary teacher. He's our primary base. Everybody else comes after him. And so he's the captain of the ship, so to speak. And so we're only going to be listening to him tonight. And whatever it is, and I can do to be able to help facilitate his words, give some perspective to them in whatever capacity I can. And if I make any mistakes, I hope they won't be too terribly significant if I do. We're going to open up with a portion of the Mishneh Torah, which is the mission statement. Right? Harambam presents the ultimate mission statement for any person, member of Israel that is studying. And he says as follows. Tzarich Adam, a human being needs to yichaven libo v'chol ma'asav kulam ledat Hashem Baruch Hu bilvad. So very emphatic words, right? Harambam doesn't use words for no reason. And here he has added several words to establish an emphatic statement. And the emphatic statement is that every human being needs to aim his heart, right? Yechaven libo literally means to aim his heart, meaning what are we zeroing in on in terms of my mind, my heart? V'chol ma'asav, and all of his deeds. And then he says again, kulam. So in case you thought any of them are not part of this, think again. It's not just when I say kol ma'asav, I'm not using a euphemism. I'm telling you everything, all of it, the entirety of what you do must be aimed at one thing and one thing only, ledat Hashem Baruch Hu, bilvad. Bilvad means with no writing agents. So that is as emphatic as you get. Harambam is saying in no uncertain terms that the entire mission of our lives, the entire mission of our lives is one thing, to know God. That means not just in terms of what I think, but in terms of what it is that I do. All of it in its entirety is to know God. And nothing else. Bilvad means, and that's it. There are no other aims. Anything else is a sub-aim to that aim. So somehow, whatever else it is that I'm doing has to be a sub-aim that ultimately leads to that aim. I've italicized that opening paragraph. I've made it into a paragraph because the rest is only an explanation of that. We may or may not come back to that. I encourage you to read the rest of it. But Harambam goes on to say, this really means everything. Your sleep, your exercise, your sex, your eating, everything. All of it needs to be aiming to God. And he explains how. And then all of a sudden he goes in and starts talking about, look, you need to eat in order to be able to be healthy. Yeah, but I thought I need to eat in order to be able to know God. Yeah, well, you need to be healthy to know God. Well, I thought, you need to rest so that you have a well-rested body. So yeah, well, I thought I'm resting. No, yeah, you need a well-rested body in order to know God. Right? You can't know him. You're sick. I mean, that's obviously a massive impediment. You have to ensure that you don't have an impediment. So he goes through all of it, and he expects that you extrapolate anything else to this framework that he presents. And he says again, V'yeshubto, v'kumo, v'diburo. You're sitting, standing, speaking. What does that mean? It means what else do you do as a human being? You're either sitting or you're standing or you're speaking. What else are you going to do, right? You're either resting or you're active or you're engaged in speech. All of it and every form of it. Hakol, all of it. Notice how many times he says hakol in this little paragraph. Hakol, kulam, hakol, all of it. Le'umat ze hadavar. What does that mean? Le'umat ze hadavar means opposite this thing. So when he says you aim your heart, your aim is over across from you. Your heart and your deeds are across from you. If we were to look at it in a figuratively physical sense, in a spatial sense. And he says, therefore, everything that you do must be opposite that aim. Right? So our positioning in a theoretical or figuratively spatial description must be constantly opposite. I can't look anywhere else other than that aim.
Moshe, you give the call, right? Rabbi's one of the most underrated guys.
So anything other than that, right? To look anywhere else, to aim anywhere else is off this mission. And it means that we're not on task. Or as they say here in Britain, one of my favorite terms is you've lost the plot. And if you've lost the plot, you're serving something else, doing something else, engaging in something else, and you have to recalculate, redirect. And that happens. That's okay. That happens. It will happen for all of us that we will veer from the aim. And little by little, the more that we train ourselves, the more we will stay on task. But it happens that we veer from the aim. And when you veer from the aim, without killing yourself, without shame, without guilt, without personal beratement, you refocus. Just refocus. And that means there always has to be a questioning, certainly at the beginning when this doesn't become natural, right, for a person. And it does. It can become natural. It can become like, obviously, I'm not thinking of anything else but knowing God. And it informs everything that I do, right? When it becomes that way, it's wonderful. But until it does, there will be a series of situations in which a person veers and has to be able to bring themselves back. Okay? So that, therefore, you recognize that Harambam really didn't give us any other options. If we would have made any other mission statement, we'd be off target. So in the mission statement is the halakha bet peragimal of Hilchot Deot, because Harambam says there's nothing else to do. There is really no other endeavor. Clear on that? Okay, so I'm not going to read the rest of it now. If we have any time afterwards, we can unpack it a bit, but I encourage you to read. But this is the opening point. Good. So if that's the case, then we have to talk about knowing God. Right? What is it to know God? I'm not going to read the rest of this halakha because what Harambam does, he says, look, you need to be able to get rest so that you are healthy enough to know God. That's already a step away. What I want to do tonight is talk about what is knowing God? What are we looking at? How do I do that? Especially when I have a God that is not physical, doesn't have any attributes, and so on and so forth in his inherent form. So let's look. So the first thing that we'll look at is a halakha in Yesodei Torah. It's a very famous halakha, at least in terms of my circles, because I read it all the time and teach it all the time. There's very many source sheets that always have this halakha on it. Interestingly, though, it does not talk about knowing God. It talks about loving God. What we're going to find is that to know him is to love him. and that knowing God and loving God is intimately interconnected. And you'll see how we develop this, right? But let's look at what loving God is about. Yeah. So Harambam says in Hilchot Yesodei Torah Bet. He says, first of all, not recorded here in the source sheets. He opens and he says there is a mitzvah to love God. Right? We have to love God. As we say over and over again, twice a day in the Kriyat Shema. There's a mitzvah to love God. Then he says, and what is the way that a person achieves this love? Right? How do you love? What is the way to love? He also includes here yirah, the reverence / fear of God. We're not going to get into the depths of that at the moment. We're looking at the select things that we can run through a line of thought for this shiur. All right. Again, I encourage you, study the bit. But this is what Rambam says about love. He says, at the time that a person, when a person contemplates the works, the deeds, the creations of God, wondrous and great, niflaim gedolim, and in those things you see the wisdom of the Creator in them, and you see she'en la'erech veloketz, it's this unbound wisdom, right? This bottomless, never-ending, infinite wisdom. Miyad hu ohev, you immediately fall in love, or you immediately love. Umshabeach, umfa'er, umitaveh. You also immediately find yourself moved to praise, to beautify, to show its beauty, speak of its beauty, and you yearn. There's a yearning, not just any yearning, ta'avad gedolah. You have this deep, powerful yearning, Lidah Hashem Agadol, to know the great name. Now, it's very interesting that he says that here, that he refers to what you want to know by seeing the creation as the name, literally, right? The great name. He doesn't say Lidah Ha'el Baruch Hu, which he says in other places. Here he says the name. So keep that in your head, because that's not a mistake. Obviously, it's not a mistake, right? But he's doing this on purpose. He's not saying you immediately love, you have this desire to know, right? You want to know the name for some reason, whatever it is that means. Contemplate what that might mean in your mind. We'll see if we find, that you were thinking in tandem. So there's this deep desire that comes about, right? And the way that I kind of, an analogy that I use for this very often is if you question this, question what your response is to an artist that moves you this way. Right? Because what we're talking about is God's art, aren't we? We're talking about God's creativity. God's creative output, literally, is what we're talking about. So imagine a human being, Lavdil, Elef Avdalot, right? I mean, we're stepping it down drastically. And imagine a human being who has put out some creative output into this world, and it has come to you, and you have experienced it and been moved by it. Think of one. In your mind, you don't have to share it. Just think of one human being, alive or dead. They don't have to be alive or dead, who has had creative output in this world. Creative simply means they have created something, right? That has influenced you, impacted you. Think about how it is that you feel about that individual. It's not elective. This is immediate. It's an emotive thing, right? It's a natural, immediate response. What do you want to do for that individual? First of all, you feel like you know that individual on a certain level because they've shared something very personal. And you can tell when it's something that's personal, when it's something that's utilitarian. Hold that, because we're going to have to come back to that as well, right? In other words, that you recognize or you feel that it's an expression of the person rather than some external mechanical construct that the person has put together, yes? And so What do you feel? What is your response when you experience something like that? Do you not praise the person? Sure you do. You become a fan, right? You still praise that person. Do you not feel a connection to that person, even though you've never met them before? Yes, you do, strangely enough. Oddly enough, you want to even be able to have an opportunity, if you could, to tell that person what it is that they've done for you, how they've impacted you. And it's so powerful, a drive in human beings. This is what creates lunatic fans. Literally, it's the only thing. This is what creates lunatic. Somebody's put out some kind of creative thing into the world, and people, whatever, they personalize it, idolize it, they take it in off the deep end, but these are the core elements of it. And there is only one entity that you are allowed to be a lunatic fan for, and that's God. Because what you have to recognize is that any other individual that you are feeling that way about is his creation. He did that thing. He did that person, right? He made Harambam. So when you read Harambam, you think this man is an absolute genius. He has completely changed my entire life, right? You realize, well, hold on a minute. I mean, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did that. And there's this beautiful midrash, which I didn't put on here. There's a beautiful midrash by Adam HaRishon, which says that Adam HaRishon was so powerful and great. I mean, this human being, the splendor of the human, and all of the animals of the garden wanted to praise him and bow to him and so on. And what Adam HaRishon does, in his goodness, in his good side, he sometimes gets a bad rap, Adam HaRishon. He said, until you praise me, before you praise me, praise the one who made me, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? So this is just an analogy, but you can come in, you can come into the framework, you can come into the mindset of it, which is extremely beautiful. So Rambam is essentially saying to know him is to love him. And how do you know him? From his output, from his creative output. He says it more explicitly. At the end of this line, if you skip down to that paragraph, right? You just skip to that down to the paragraph. And he says, "Ulfi hadevarim ha'elu." Based on these things, I am going to help you love God by explaining, right? I'm going to go through many of the things that the creator of the world has done, the master of the world has done. So that I can, and this is a beautiful statement. I cannot tell you how beautiful this statement is, so that there can be an opening for you to love the name. What is that? So there can be an opening for you. The reason is because people read this, and people who don't know, I had to give you an analogy. The reason is because people, contrary to popular belief, are not necessarily open to love. Shocker, but they aren't, because we're so damn guarded all the time. And we're not vulnerable enough to allow things to move us this way. And that's one of the reasons why fans become so self-absorbed, because they can't actually recognize this is a wholesome interconnection. It's all about me and my needs and how I want to own this thing and so on. And so what Harambam is saying is that I'm going to explain these things to you to open you up to the possibility of loving. You should be able to just experience these things directly and realize, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down in this safe space here in our little bit. I'm going to start talking to you about these things. I'm going to open these things to you. As I open these things to you, hopefully you will open to being able to have actual love. Right? So he says this now. He says further, as the Hachamim said, B'inyan ahava. This is not direct in the words that he's quoting, by the way, and this is actually a questionable source. We'll see in a minute. But nonetheless, he says the Hachamim said this in the framework of the love of God. And what they said were in the midst of speaking of the love of God, Shemitoch kach, that from studying his works, from experiencing his deeds, mitoch kach, from that, atamakir, you come to recognize. He doesn't say no, right? Makir is a very particular word. It's not atam yodea, atamakir. You recognize Misha Amar ve'haya olam, the one who spoke, and the world came into existence. That one, you'll come to recognize him. So Hachamim say this, particularly in terms of Harambam sources. Rabbi Meir said that when you look at the works of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mitoch kach, from doing that, ata makir, you come to recognize the one who spoke and created the world. And he says this explicitly in a letter. In which they asked Harambam a series of questions. This letter is from, I put it the page number down in the Shelat edition, right, of the Igrot of Harambam. I typed this one out because I wanted to present it to you so much that, I couldn't find it online. So I typed this out for you. So if there's any mistakes, it's because of my typing. And they ask Harambam, it says in the Gemara that a person should be mehashev tekufot mazalot. First of all, he wants to know, what does that mean? That a person who can calculate tekufot and mazalot, whatever it is that means, right? Seasons and, the astronomical movements of the earth and stars and so on, and how it is that they manifest. It's not astrology, it's astronomy, how these things function in relation to the earth. Anybody who knows how to do that, ve'eno mehashev, right, and doesn't do it, is in the wrong. They're missing something. They say it more severe in the Gemara, but this is what they're bringing up. And so they're asking Harambam the following question, right? They ask Harambam, first of all, what does it mean when it says a person who knows how, or who knows how to be mehashev? What does it mean that they know how? That's first of all. And second of all, and more importantly, this is the reason I'm bringing this particular letter, is they say, and another thing is, what's the point of it? Ma yitzeh mizeh. Okay, so I'm spending time figuring out all of these calculations. What's the point of it, right? Ma yitzeh mizeh means literally, what's the outcome? What's in it for me if I do that? So Harambam explains to Kuvot Mazdo. I'm not getting into that. In the bolded point, he says, Ve'omnam umrechem. He goes, look, that's what Tikufot, the person, what we mean by person Tikufot Mazdo. But what you say, Ma yitzeh mizeh? What's going to come out of the fact that you know how to calculate these things, that you have a better understanding about the nature of the astronomical movements of the stars in the sky in relation to the earth and its function and effects on our seasons and everything else that they affect on the earth? Kvar bi'er Rabbi Meir b'Baraita. Rabbi Meir already explained that in the Baraita, in which he says, Histakel b'ma'asav. Look at his deeds. Shemitoch kach. And this is what he just quoted in the Mishneh Torah, because from that, that is how you come to know God. To know him is to love him, but to know him is through looking at what he's put out. And what has he put out? The universe. That's his creative output. All of it, not part of it, not some of it, all of it, all of it. You with me? Okay. I'm going to skip the next source for now. I only put in the source after that, which is a selection from Melachim, which talks about Shlomo HaMelech. And it says about Shlomo HaMelech that he was basically a big David Attenborough of his time. Basically what it says about him. He was the David Attenborough of his time, and people were so enthralled. As much as they liked David Attenborough, they used to come to listen to Shlomo HaMelech. Says about Shlomo, but tereb chochmat Shlomo mechochmat kol bnei kedem. The wisdom of Shlomo was greater than all of the wise men of the East. Mikol chochma Mitzrayim, and all of the wisdom of Egypt, which were quite advanced. Vayachkam mikol ha'adam. He became wiser than all of mankind at the time, all of humankind. They were pretty famous, there were Einsteins of the time. They list, he was smarter than Einstein. Right? He was smarter than Etana Izrahi, Veheman, Vechalkol, these famously wise people. Vedarda, Bedemahol. Vahi Shemo Bechol leaders were very famous because of his wisdom. Vaydaber Sheloshet Alafim Mashal, 3,000 proverbs he wrote, he spoke, right? Ways of relating to reality in the world and life and so on and so forth, in pithy, succinct lines. Yeah. It's one of the reasons why quotes are so powerful, because they take ideas that otherwise one person will say in a paragraph, and you say it in a line, and you get it, and you just hold it, and it's beautiful and elegant, right? Vaydaber al ha'itzim. People sometimes translate this based on a particular midrash that he spoke to the trees, but that's not the pshat. The pshat is that he spoke about the trees. Right? The ber, what did he speak about? He spoke about the trees. Mina erez asher beLebanon, from the cedars of Lebanon. Ad ha'ezob, to the bushes. Asher yotze bakir, that grow out of the kotel ha'ma'aravi, right? Those bushes that grow out of the walls. Vaydaber ala behema. Not only that, he spoke about not only the flora but the fauna. Right? I mean, if you didn't have National Geographic, you bought a ticket to a lecture from Shlomo HaMelech. Spoke about the animals and the off and the flying creatures, all the creepy crawlies and the fish and of the sea. Spoke about all of it. Well, why? What's he wasting his time for? This is the king that built the Bet Midrash. You have anything better to do than to give constant science classes or nature classes? They all came to hear him. They all came to listen to him. One thing to know about the nature, about the time of Shlomo HaMelech, it's the only time in Jewish history that the Jewish people were genuinely recognized as the leaders of the known world at the time, without any anti-Semitism. Because they were fully and completely in themselves. There was no shame, no guilt, no self-hatred, no deficiency, none of that. And that was in no small part to Shlomo HaMelech. But that's just a little tidbit in there as this kind of a spice in the middle of things, just to have an idea, right? Not really there to prove much. Okay. Good. Buckle your seatbelts. We're going to dive into the Moreh. It's in this Moreh that we really unpack everything that we've said up until now. It really drives it home in a way that really is unmatched. And in my opinion, and I'm only speaking for me, in my life, in my experience, in my learning, there is nothing more powerful than this piece of the Moreh Nebuchim to drive all of this home, to really explain what it is that we mean by knowing Kadosh Baruch Hu. And again, that's the name of the game. The whole name of the game is knowing him. That is the whole depth. Nothing else. Nothing else. So Harambam says as follows. He opens up with this episode, right? There is an episode. What is the episode? The episode is during the debacle of the golden calf. So this is a very interesting episode. Because on the one hand, God, at one moment is ready to annihilate the people, literally, right? Literally wipe them out and start with Moshe. And on the other hand, Moshe reaches some of the most intimate, personal, high-level connections with God as a result of that whole situation. And he finds himself in a very tender place with HaKadosh Baruch Hu post the sin. Right, he's gone up and he's asked forgiveness for the people. He's negotiated clemency for the people with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at least in the way that the Torah presents it to us. Moshe is negotiating with God, arguing with him. HaKadosh Baruch Hu agrees to not annihilating them. He agrees to more than he has ever really agreed in one session, like in one set of meetings. At this point, which in and of itself is worth studying, right? Why and how and whatever it is. But really, I mean, the concessions that God makes as a result of the golden calf are staggering. But that's for another shiur. Part of this is Moshe finds himself in a very, like I said, tender, intimate space with HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a result of HaKadosh Baruch Hu agreeing through Moshe's negotiations to forgive the people. Moshe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's agreement to walk with the people through the mud, even when HaKadosh Baruch Hu was ready to, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's first response was, okay, I won't annihilate them, but I'm not walking with these people. I mean, I'll call me when you get there. I don't know. I'll send some, sentinels, and you'll walk with you. I'm not walking with these people. I'm God, for goodness sakes. I don't do that kind of thing. No, sorry, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you're going to have to walk with us. And you're going to trudge with us through the mud, whether you like it or not. And if you're not going to, oh, by the way, and if you don't, we're not leaving either. You're talking about sending, messengers to walk with us. You're assuming that we're going to walk away. We're not walking away. We'll stay right here unless you do walk with us. Okay, okay, Moshe, fine, I'll do that too. And so out of that negotiation, Yom Kippur is created. Depending on how you look at the timeline, the Mishkan is established. A day a year in order to be able to wipe away all their filth. Literally, that's the only solution. They're going to be piling filth on. You want me to sit and trudge through the filth indefinitely? I'm going to need to set up a day where I can wipe away the filth. Fine. So Moshe says good. So let's do that. Right? We'll have a Yom Kippur. Otherwise, it says later on in Sefer Vayikra that Kadosh Baruch Hu is shochen itam betoch tumotam. He lives with them in their filth. That's unheard of. It's nuts. Nobody would take this for granted that this is just normal. It was not part of the program. Moshe negotiates that and makes that part of the program. In that discussion, like I said, is tremendous intimacy, and Moshe Rabbeinu takes advantage of it. And he moves into deeper intimacy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu for two things. First thing that he asks for is, he says, look, I really need to know you better. So he says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he says, Hodi'ani na derechecha. He says, please make known to me your ways. Ve'edacha. And through that, I will know you. The other thing that he asks HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he gets an answer, right? He gets that, and the response to that is the affirmative. HaKadosh Baruch Hu agrees to respond to that in the affirmative. Moshe then asks him, Har'eni na et kevodech. Show me your glory. Which, according to the Hachamim, means, and Rabbi brings this, means I want to know you in your essence. I want to know your essential being. To that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, look, if you want to know that, you'll have to say goodbye. You can't be alive in human form and know anything near that, right? Lo yirani adam v'hai. Sorry. But I can help give you some kind of consolation prize for not being able to give you that. I'll put you in the cleft of the rock, and so on. So we're going to study that, because in that, obviously, is where we're going to understand what it means to know God, because Moshe says, Ve'edacha. In other words, through Hodi'ani na derachecha, through showing me your derachim, edacha, that's how I'll know you. So that's a tremendous key that the Torah is presenting to us in teaching us what it means to know God. It's not just unique to Moshe Rabbeinu. It may be that the level of Moshe is unique, but it's telling us this is how you know God. As a human being, that's what you do. So Harambam unpacks this, and that's what we need to understand here. So let's listen very carefully. Here you need focus. Walk with me. Do you want to put this up on the, can you put this up on the, share the screen so that those online and those, in case anybody wants to see this. Yeah. Good. And then we'll bring this down. Okay. Da. I love when Harambam opens with that. It's like, no. Right? He always does that. Da. He goes, no. Kiraban shel. This, by the way, is the translation of Rav Kafir, which is the only version I really feel comfortable reading. It says, Da kiraban shel hachamim Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom, the master of all prophets, as Harambam calls him in the Mishneh Torah as well. Moshe Rabbeinu bikesh shete bakashot. He asked for two requests from God. He got answered. He got answers for both of them. One answer was yes, one answer was no, basically, right? The first question was, or the first request was, the one thing that he asked him was to know his essential truth of his being, right? Of God's being. His etzim, right? His actual existence, whatever it is that means. And the second, right? I'm presenting it to you out of order. Moshe asked the second question first, and that was, he asked him to know his attributes, his expressions, which is kaviyachol, external to his essential essence, right? That's what comes from, exudes, expressed outward. He answered him on both questions. In one sense that he said, he promised him, I will show you all of my attributes, all of my expressions. Show them all to you. And he also answered the second question. You can't know me in the way that you want to know me in my full glory, as you are, as it is. However, he showed him an aspect that through that he'll be able to know the most that any human can know in human form. What Moshe did ultimately end up grasping and achieving in terms of his knowledge of God, nobody before him or after him achieved. So it was of the highest levels. Further, right? So that's the first opening. Now let's get into it. The request of knowing his attributes, right, was in his saying, Moshe says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, let me know, teach me, show me, make known to me your ways, right? And in that, and I will know you. That's the question. So Harambam stops here. He can't help himself, but stop here. He says, I want you to understand what this means just in the very fact that Moshe asked in the way that he asked. This is a caveat he's making, right? This is a side point, really, that he's making. He's not jumping now into unpacking the question. He says, he says, pay attention, contemplate what wondrous points are in this question. In Moshe's saying these words, what does it teach you? First thing it tells you, this is important, listen. The first thing that it tells you is that God can be known through his ta'orim, through his expressions, his descriptions, his attributes, whatever you want to call them. We'll see what they are more in a minute. But he can be known through that. It's the first thing I teach you. So Harambam is clearly saying here, the fact that Moshe asked that is teaching all of us. It's not just for me, Moshe. Everybody. If you want to know God, this is the way. Okay? That's number one. Shim yada dirachim yada'il. You know the ways, you know him to the capacity that you can. First teaching. Second teaching, and this is huge as well. And now the continuation of the pasuk is so that I can find favor in your eyes. Please, I'm asking all of you here and online, pay close attention to the next words. I cannot emphasize them enough. Listen carefully. He says, from the fact that Moshe says, through knowing you, I will then find favor in your eyes. Rambam says, what does that teach us? It teaches us, okay, Milamed kimi sheyadat Hashem. It teaches us that one who comes to know God, hu asher yimtzah hen be'einav, that is the person that finds favor in God's eyes, the one who knows him. Lo mi shetzam v'yitpalel bilbad, not somebody who only prays and fasts. Notice he says bilbad, right? It's not that those things aren't important, but they are important in the context of this goal, not as ends in and of themselves. So it doesn't matter how religious a person is. You don't know God, you have not found favor in his eyes. And Rambam is emphatic about that. And he says we learn that from the pasuk. And that's why you have a pasuk, take a look at the end. I'm not going to put it up, I could put it up on the end. I threw this in at the end because it's important to recognize that it is entirely possible to be engaged in Torah and religious life and not find favor in God's eyes. And he says, it's one of the most powerful pisukim in Sefer Yirmiyah. Kadosh Baruch Hu is talking through Yirmiyah. He says, "HaKohanim lo amru ayeh Adonai." The Kohanim, the priests, they don't ask where I am. They're not interested at all in where I am and what and anything about me. V'tofesei Torah lo yeda'uni. And the people who are holding Torah, notice it says, they're holding Torah. They know the Torah. They're holding Torah. They're monopolizing Torah. They've got authority over the Torah. Lo yeda'uni. They don't know me. That's a very powerful statement to Yirmiyahu Navi, because Kadosh Baruch Hu is saying it is entirely possible for people to hold Torah and not know me. And the only way to know me and find favor in my eyes is through the Ta'arim, right? It's through the Drachim. Back to the Moreh. So he says, anyone who knows God, that is the one that HaKadosh Baruch Hu desires. Of course, because this is about love, isn't it? We've already established that to know him is to love him. And this is all ultimately a question of loving connection. That's what it was with Abraham Avinu. That's what it's meant to be with us. And the whole Birit is based on that. A person who does not have full knowledge or has faulty knowledge, who has that person is rejected and kept at bay. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not going to mechanically engage with people when there's not a genuine desire for love and connection. What, are you going to use me for your purposes? You're going to push my buttons, manipulate me? Is that what you want? I'm sorry, I don't do that. God's not codependent. God will keep you at bay, and he has no problems with that. So he says, and this is not an on-off thing. There's range. To the degree that a person knows, a person is close. To the degree that a person doesn't know or is not aware, a person is not close. But it's all about the knowledge. Rambam writes this very strongly and explicitly at the end of Hilchot Teshuvah in the 10th perek. He says, Kefi ha'de'ah ha'ahaba, as one knows, is the love and the closeness and so on. It all works in tandem. Then he says, he goes, look, I veered off a bit from the goal of this particular perek, but I thought it was important to mention that. We'll come back now to the thing. Now, when Moshe asked to know these attributes of God, he was also asking for forgiveness for the people over there. And he got answered for the forgiveness. The people were forgiven based on HaKadosh Baruch Hu's, based on Moshe's request. Then he asked these questions. So once he saw HaKadosh Baruch Hu forgave, there was a closeness, there was a return to intimacy and connection. Moshe asked these questions because he found that it was an ait ratzon for these questions. He then said, Hareni nad kebodecha. He said, I want to take a step further and I want to know your glory. To that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, right? So let's look first at the first question and how he was answered the first question. What did HaKadosh Baruch Hu answer to that question? Kadosh Baruch Hu says, Moshe, I will teach you my derachim. You know what I'm going to do? Ani avir kol tuvi al panecha. I'm telling you what I'm going to do, Moshe. I am going to bring all of my good and pass it before you, before your face, in front of you. I'm going to pass it all before you. Says Harambam, okay, so this is getting very serious because this is further an indication of what it is to know God. We learn from the question what it is to know God. Of course, we're going to learn from the response what it is to know God even more, right? So HaKadosh was saying, yes, you can know me through my dirachim. Yes, you will find favor in my eyes, and I'm going to do this in order to be able to show you my dirachim. I'm going to ma'avir kol tuvi al panecha. Harambam has a phenomenal insight into this. So elegant, so simple, so powerful and groundbreaking at the same time. He says, what is kol tuvi? What is that? I mean, if we know that, then we get what HaKadosh Hu is doing. He says, Ani avir kol tuvi. What is kol tuvi? If I don't know what that is, I don't know what anything is. I have to know what that is in order to be able to understand it all, what's going on in this particular parasha. Says Harambam, very simple. Aval umro kol tuvi. The fact it says kol tuvi, hu remez lema she'etziv lefanav הוא רמז למה שהציב לפניו כל אמצעים שעליהם נאמר, וירא אלוהים את כל אשר עשה, והנה טוב מאוד. What it was a hinting to everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ever created. In that, it says in the pasuk, Kol Tov, obviously is everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. So it says, Vayar Elohim et kol asher asa, v'ine tov me'od. Kol Tov, Kol Tovi. It's all my good. You hear this? How elegant, and how beautiful, and how powerful. So for Moshe Rabbeinu, however it was presented to him, HaKadosh Baruch Hu presented him the entire matrix of creation. Why do I say matrix? Because that's what Rambam says. He uses that word in more words, but that's essentially what he says. He says, what did he show him? He says, kavanati. What I mean to say by that is, hatzavatam lefanav, he presented them to him, shiasig tivarehem, so that he should know their nature, right? And kishuram ze bazeh, their contextual reality. Kishuram ze bazeh really means their interconnections with each other. That's a matrix, right? He showed Moshe the matrix of creation. So he didn't just show him details and data. He showed him the contextual, the full context, not narrow context, the full contextual experience of the whole of creation. Whatever it is that means for Moshe, I mean, you can imagine that it's quite experiential, because when you start to try and parse this, good luck, right? That's the kind of thing that the Hachamim say, you know, if the whole heavens was parchment and all of the trees were quills and all of the oceans was ink, I wouldn't be able to write to you. That's their way of saying that this is not definable in data points, right? It's an experiential thing. And that's what he does to Moshe. But what it tells you is that he's showing Moshe creation. He's showing Moshe his full output, his full creative output, the whole matrix of his creative output. You hear this? You can't get out of it. I mean, it's an unbelievable presentation. There's no holes in this. So he says, that's why Kadosh Baruch Hu says later about Moshe Rabbeinu, he's faithful in all my house. What's the house? My creation. He knows, like no one else knows, the whole of my world, my universe, an understanding that is sturdy, upstanding, and strong. It's unmovable, right? Right? Because I experiences, knowledge, you know, and so on, understanding that is not well-founded, that isn't stable, right? Is just that. It's not stable. It's faulty. It's easily kicked aside. So what have you learned from this? You can underline this, because you can't, because you're looking at it on your phones and you're not able to reinforce the line, but this is the line to reinforce. He says what we find from this in no uncertain terms is knowing those things, those deeds, those creations of God, they themselves are his expressions. Do you understand? He's not saying that knowing those things are ways to understand his expressions. They are the expressions. The world is an expression of God. That's what he's saying. Asher al yadam unoda, and through them he's known, right? It's the only way you can know him, but how you know him is whatever it is that he's expressed. So it's the same way. Do I feel like I know Rambam? I feel like I know him a great deal, to whatever degree I can, through everything, his entire output in the world. I've never met him before. He died a long time ago, but I hear his voice in my head. To whatever degree it is, right? Obviously, I don't know Rambam. But whatever degree it is that I know. So I want to stop here and I want to say something about this. Because if this is true, to not study God's world is to run away from him. It's not just we put up with it. It's not just we have to so that we can kind of get some knowledge down. Or dama the shivla pikoros nonsense. Right? Oh, we got to learn about the world. So if we have some heretics come our way, we'll have some kind of artillery to be able to answer them with. Right? Of course, there is a requirement. I'm not casting any aspersions on the Ma'amar Hazal, right? What it says in Pirkei Avot. Of course, yeah, I know that, but that's not the reason why to study the world. It may be a reason. The reason to study the world is because you have an obligation to know God and love God. We all do. And that's why you do it. And to not do that is to run away from him, is to not be able to bear to look at him, is to not be able to stand him. In all honesty, that's what it is. And to fail to recognize that is a tremendous failure. If the ultimate goal of our lives is to know him. And this is the way to know him, in no uncertain terms. Not only are the expressions that, but his actions as well are that, which are two things, right? In other words, there's more than just the actual structural output of the universe. It's also how he acts in the universe. And that is shown as well by these are things that are expressive in terms of his actions. Rahum, Hanun, Erechapayim, he then speaks about those things. It's important to recognize over here, and this is a mistake that a lot of people make. When they say, look at God's actions or attributes, they think, look at what it is that he does in the world. But the world is a stage. You know, it's utilitarian. It's there in order to be able to set an environment in which God can act in the world. Don't pay so much attention to that. Pay more attention to what it is that he's doing in the world. And that is a terrible mistake. You may not be able to learn anything from, the structure of a star in terms of your midot or your what you call it, your own attributes, right? How it is that you behave in terms of your character. But the more that you know about those things, you know about the nature of reality. And the more you know about the nature of reality, you know about the one who brought it into being. Does that make sense? Do you hear that? The world itself, the universe itself, is not an arbitrary stage in which God acts. The world itself is an expression of God. And I'm going to say another thing here. So people say, oh, great, so then I'll study science. But not so much literature and music and art and, those kinds of things. My contention to that is, why not? Why is it okay to study the natural structure of the universe, but not the entities that populate that universe, or at least this particular planet on the universe? I mean, they're certainly the most interesting creations of God, and also the most prolific, and also the most diverse. Stars are really simple and cheap. They're a bunch of hydrogen bombs. Hazak Baruch. We could probably recreate those in some kind of small sense. Try doing humans on your own, right? Not where you just follow the instructions, talking about putting one together from scratch. Try to match that diversity with only like a couple eyes, a nose, and a mouth, No, that we shouldn't study. The brains that animate those human beings, are those not astonishing creations? The human brain, the most complex structure in the known universe by many orders of magnitude, that should not be. They're writing their own notes, right, for the whole class. Thank you. Yes, structure, precisely. Do you hear? I shouldn't study the human minds, the various outputs of those human minds, even when they are faulty. Do I not need to know about the poisons and toxins in the world as part of the nature of reality itself as well? And therefore the crazy minds and sometimes you have to be very careful about looking into the black hole because it'll look back at you, as they say. Fine. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't be without yir'ah, right? The reverence that we're talking about. And that's why Harambam couples reverence always with the love. Yes, all of that. But make no mistake where the source of the knowledge of God is, where you get it. I want to skip down. וזה היה תכלית מטרתו, שאלתו כי לסוף הלשון, וידעך למען ימשחם בעיניך וראה כי עמך הגוי הזה. שאני צריך להנהיגם בפעולות אלך בהם בעקבות פעוליך בהנהגתם. So what he says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, because I do need to know your ways, I need to know how you act, right? Which gets to be very complicated, because one of the problems with the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu acts, and when I say problem, I'm borrowing the term, is that God is not governed by laws and rules. So it's almost what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying to him, I need you to follow some rules, and then tell me what the rules are. How do you act? Because I need to run this people, and if I have to lead this people, I have to know where you are. And if I'm going to lead them, then I have to know how you are. So can you help me with that? And so on and so forth, right? You're going to act in these ways, and if you speak these things, and you bring these things out, and so on, in whatever ways that they have. So Moshe Rabbeinu needed to be able to bring Bnei Israel into their goals. And their goals was to be able to know God. And if he was going to do that, he needed to know God, to know how to lead them towards that. So, that is the very ethos of the Habura, but the Habura, of course, is only coming from an ethos that is several thousand years old, manifest in generation after generation by our ancestors. And this is what they knew. Their reverence was for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so they were careful that it didn't become some kind of personal, subjective, self-serving endeavor, but rather one goal, to know God. But what our ancestors knew, and when I say that, I mean those that are essentially the spiritual progenitors, the spiritual forebears of the Habura, and those who are, of that milieu and limud and derech and so on, is that to study the world through the lens of Torah is to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And not only do we not run from it, we run towards it, because we recognize that that's our way. There is no other way. And so everything that we learn will somehow either be forming the lens or helping us know those things. So the Bet Midrash helps us to be able to have the lens to a tremendous degree. It helps us to be able to know Torah, to give us a framework through which we can look at this world and study this world and come to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It will help us understand the nature of the Berit, the covenant. It will help us understand the Lashon, the language of Torah, in various ways. It will help us to understand the Mikra itself and the Torah Shebaal Peh, and how does it manage that and integrate that into a way of our thought and our approach to being able to know HaKadosh Baruch Hu through his derachim. And Harambam is our captain. I say that in no uncertain terms. Of course, we like the Andalusia, and there are many who are like him, but he's the captain. And he is always who we will go back to. He's our guide. Because there was, he was remarkable. He was one of those amazing humans that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. So there's much that can be unpacked in all that we've said. There's much more detail that I haven't mentioned, of course, but we are at the hour, and we will end here. And I hope that all of that comes from this forward for all of the teachers in the courses and classes and so on. It will help to be able to bring this out into its bit by bit unpacking. Yes? It's up to you, and it's up to them. I don't know. I'm concerned about social contract, so you tell me. I don't want to breach the contract.
Question here from Felix. So one cannot know God by learning Torah alone?
It's not enough. You can't just learn Torah and not engage in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's world. You can have a lens through Torah. You can have a knowledge, a great deal of Torah, through Torah, about the framework of how it is that I engage with this, plus how it is that I serve. Right? I mean, the mitzvot are how I serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how am I oved HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But to know him, it requires a knowledge of the world, without question.
Any other questions? Please put it in the chat. 2 more questions. Is there such thing as learning the world too much?
No. There's only such thing as learning the world wrong. No such thing as too much. It's only how, not how much.
Ryan, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead and ask. Or not. Anybody else? One more question.
I've got one.
Go ahead.
Okay. So far in what we saw in the Rambam, he didn't mention Torah at all as a lens. In order to love Hashem, Torah wasn't mentioned at all as being relevant in what we've seen so far. Or have I missed it?
So take a look at the piece that I skipped, Bereshit Rabbah. This is a Midrash, Hachamim, which presents this point. Rabbi Hoshaya Rabbah patach ve'ayetz lo amon ve'ayesh ashuim yom yom. It's a pasuk in Misleh. I shall be by him in Ammon. The Hachamim say, what does this word Ammon mean? So they don't the word. They say Ammon, Uman. The word Ammon should be Uman, as in terms of an artisan. And what is that referring to? The Torah is speaking in that pasuk, they say. The Torah is saying that I was etzlo, etzel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in Uman. I was an artisan. I was like a tool, a creative tool in the hand of the Creator. In what way? Ani hayiti keli umenuto shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I was his creative tool. It's normal that in human endeavors, when a king wants to build a palace, he doesn't just take, whatever it is that he had the vision in his head and start putting bricks down. There is planning, right, that goes on for this. Right? He gets an architect in order to be able to help him to put this together. The architect, he doesn't take it from his brain and just put it out. He writes sketches. He has planning. He has pads and blueprints and so on that he puts out first, and from those builds the building. He's got to know how to be able to situate the rooms, in relation to each other, the pipes, the plumbing, the whole thing. He's got to make sure that he builds it so it all works in tandem together. That's how Kadosh Baruch Hu looked at the Torah, and he used the Torah as a blueprint for the world. What is that saying? Obviously, God's not physical. He doesn't have blueprints. It's not right. What is it saying? What it's saying is that the creation of the world is emergent from whatever it is that we recognize as being a framework of Torah. It's the way the Hachamim are teaching it to us. So that means that I should be able to, through the study of Torah, understand the world in the way that the architect and the hiring agent of the architect meant for it to be used and understood. Does that help? There's more there. This is one particular source. You see?
Thank you.
It's why the Torah is called the Keli Hemda, like it says in Pirkei Avot. It's a vessel. It's a precious vessel, but it's a vessel nonetheless. Okay? We have minyan in here? We do, right? Rabbi Hanyan Shal Merosal Kadosh Baruch Hu Zikot Israel Lefikach Rabba Leim Torah Tzvot Shelma Ramah Hafiz Man Zitko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir. I'll go right into Arbit. Yeah. So I'm going to kindly ask if the ladies want to just step behind the door for Arbit. محمد يبارك وطيب يميخ الكتاب اسمعوا كلام كريم الشيخ تحية قومي وقوم حي دخول بيت اسرائيل بعد لا قريب امين يشمل الله بارك الله على عميات بارك مشتبع بارك تران السير فداوي عليه تلال شمال كتشاب ريفو لا اله من كل بركاته شباب تشبع حدا عنا امين على اسرائيل بعد البنان اعتمدهم على كل تمديت تمدهم عسكين وغيتاك بيشتاق دي بيتردد دي خل أتار بأتار يلانا وهون خل حنا وحزدار رحمين قدام ريش مايا عابد وامين يشنا مربى مش مايا حين سبع يشوع من حمام شذ وارف وأقول أو سعد خبرا بالريح وخوان سلالان وخل مسلم وامين وسيش لهم بالماء قبل رحمة يسيش عنهم كل إسرائيل وامين لو رحمة يخبر عوام لو يشوع بفاش يقول لو يعرف الله وشيع من يعلمون يوم كلين بركود الله يبارك بارك الله يبارك ولا معيب القتاد ولا حول الشير بالضروم معي وربي الحكماء פותח שערים נתונה משנתי מחד בזמנים סדר כוכבים ושמדי ברקיע קורסו מבורר מדדי וגורר לחושך